Guys, welcome back to Inner Beauty Code. I'm so excited about our guest today. Her name is Kendall Reusing. She is a 8-time jiu-jitsu champion. She's currently a black belt, and she is also a mindset coach and an online coach for athletes. She also owns jiu-jitsu schools, 4 different ones in California. And Kendall, tell us more about yourself. Welcome on the show.
Hello. Yes. Thank you so much for having me and for the sweet introduction. It's really great to be here. Yeah. So I'm a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, have some schools. And I also, the nice thing about what I find nice about my career is that I do the athlete side of things and the business owner side of things, but I also work on the media side. So I get to do commentary, interviewing. I get to do like a lot of it's really fun because I feel like I get to be on both sides of the work. And then I also have online coaching, like you mentioned. I coach jiu-jitsu athletes all around the world in the areas of mindset, nutrition, strength and conditioning, and of course, jiu-jitsu. But mindset is really where I'm most passionate. And I think I talk a lot about that on social media. A big part of my social media as well, like my presence there is I started using it when I was in high school as a journal. So I've just kind of like kept that flow going this entire time. I'm 26 now. And I've been really vocal about my eating disorder recovery and mental health and body image, especially as a woman in a male dominated space, in a combat sport, and in a weight class sport, like where our body is such a big part of our identity. How do we balance that feminine, like creativity, sensuality, intuition with the masculine, like I'm literally fighting somebody trying to kill them. Like how do I balance that? And then also my body's on display. Like there's a lot going on here, and I'm training with men. And so I talk a lot about that. And I also travel all around the world, getting to teach seminars and getting to compete. And so yeah, really beautiful career in large part due to jujitsu, but also have a background of wrestling for Team USA in wrestling and judo and business ownership and a lot of mentorship in those areas that have really led to where I am today.
You guys, as you can hear, she is a force to be reckoned with. And I think it's so cool that you do all those different things. If you know about human design, Kendall, I bet you're a manifesting generator. Since
Wow,
you have
that's
so,
look.
oh my gosh, I'm going to talk to you about that afterwards. But,
Yeah,
anyways,
sure.
what I love is that you are a woman in predominantly male sports, which is really cool. I know jujitsu and wrestling for women are getting more popular now. I've only been doing jujitsu for 2.5 years, and I am so inspired by you. And that's why I want you to talk more about this because I find it so helpful for myself and for other women that I know that practice jujitsu. And I actually do wrestling occasionally as well. And I absolutely love it and wish that they would have had wrestling classes where I'm from when I was younger, because that wasn't a thing girls did. I'm much older than you. But
You're not that much older, but also, yeah, it is like not wrestling in high school for girls is still in most places a big no-no, and there's not a wrestling team for girls in most places. And sometimes the girls will wrestle in the boys team. That's what I did. We started building a women's team, and I'm in California where it's like pretty forward thinking in that area. But we were starting to build a women's team by the end as I started graduating, but there still wasn't like a real team. And on in most places in the world, I mean, even California, like I said, that's how it is. So it's still growing, and there are like women just got their own like women's wrestling just finally emerged into the NCAA here in the United States. Before that, they had their own thing. So there wasn't even like it, you get the idea. But yeah, so it's still growing and coming up. Now we see a lot of women's teams being developed, but for the most part, female wrestlers out there have been wrestling just on the men's teams for a very long time.
yeah, and I think that's so cool. Like I said, that you had the courage to do that. I know you started jujitsu at a young age, 5, and you've done all different martial art, judo, and then
Mhm.
wrestling. But being a woman and coming into an environment that is so testosterone heavy and male men everywhere, and you're a minority there. I think for women it could be a very intimidating sport to join. I know I was very intimidated for a while before I joined, but it has been one of the best decisions I ever made. And I know you spoke about mindset, and I know I'm very passionate about talking about masculine and feminine energies and psychology. So what advice could you offer to women, or tell us about your experience being a woman in a male dominated sport and excelling so well at what you're doing and making it your career, and owning businesses around this
Yeah.
sport?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's so much to dive into in that question. I think that I think when I was young, I really connected to my feminine when I was very young. And, I was a very spiritually inclined child. My parents, we would go to, I didn't grow up in organized religion, but we would go to a service at a church with my grandma on Christmas. And I would like go up and talk on the microphone. I mean, I was just like I was very spiritually inclined and I was very in touch with my heart. And I think somewhere along the way, especially being in the wrestling field, but also just learning pretty early on that when I was in these male dominated fields, when I embodied what men excelled at or what was like, traditionally more masculine, I got more attention, I got more success, I got more applause, And so it wasn't really until I would say my early 20s that I felt almost this like defiance towards that, where I was just like, fuck this. Like, I started feeling little glimpses of the power that I bring to the table that's different than what men naturally bring to the table. Like, the power of my emotion, like the intelligence of our emotion, like that when we feel a little bit of a something is off or there's an emotional reaction to something, like digging into the intelligence of that and asking questions why that's coming up, like these the level of passion, sensuality, creativity, these things, the softness, the vulnerability, instead of running away from them, I started running towards them. And I work with my mom in business. So there is some of that I've definitely gleaned from her. And we make jokes all the time about like, yeah, we've had to like be the man in our, in our business worlds and many, many times at the individual business level, but also at the larger organization level of business and even just managing staff and things like that. So, with all that being said, it's definitely been a challenge for sure to know when to like wield the power of being able to step back into masculine and then also when to like relax more into my feminine. So what I will say now is that both my masculine and feminine play a huge role in my life. Like really, really necessary to have both. So for example, in my athletic arena, if we just take one arena. So I would consider like my level of ambition and drive to dominate a tournament, right? Feels very masculine to me. It's like it's very rugged, it's very intense, and the discipline that it requires is also very masculine. There's a lot of structure around my routine, around my training, around what needs to be done, around when I do cardio, looking at my heart rate variability. And, it's a very black, some things are very black and white. Whereas with my feminine energy, or what you could define as feminine energy, is what I'm feeling during a training session and what I know to be true. So there are times in a session where I know myself very well at this point, and TBD, there's going to be more to come. But at this point, I'm pretty in touch with like my heart and my head, like who's speaking right now, my heart or my head. And I consider my head to be more of my masculine, my heart to be more of my feminine. And that doesn't necessarily apply to everybody, but that's like an interesting visual that really helps me discern what's going on within me. So when my head is telling me that I'm tired or I can't do more, whatever it is, or I'm not good enough, then I can override that because I'm like, that doesn't need to be true to me. Like, that's my head speaking to me. And then I use that, like my masculine, to be like, no, this is what we're doing. Like, you need to turn this way. This is what I said is going to happen. This is what's going to happen. But when my heart starts speaking to me, like, this isn't right. I need to take today off. I'm not feeling this. I don't want to train with this partner because something's off here. Like like sometimes there's a lot of shit going on in our lives, and you just have to buckle down and get through it. And then there are other times where things are coming up and my heart is speaking to me, and I'm like, no, I need to take a step back here. Like, this is what's important. So for me, that's kind of now where my masculine and feminine have that dance where both are really relevant, but who is speaking and who needs to step up to the plate and like run the show at that moment. Sometimes like my feminine needs to run the show in more tangible or like more materialistic ways where I'm like, no, like I do want to go get my nails done. I do want to take really good care of myself. I do want to go put makeup on. But oftentimes it's not necessarily that version of feminine energy. And it's more like how in touch am I with my body? Like when I put my hand on my lower stomach and I close my eyes and I take deep breaths, like can I feel energy moving through me? Like that is more now. Whereas when I'm getting into like problem solving and making a schedule and keeping my commitments and those kinds of things, it's more of a masculine state. So again, it's more of like an internal balance for me now these days. But I find the same thing when I'm interacting with other people. So when I'm managing my staff or when I am running a team practice, like there are times where I step into more of a feminine role or I step into more of a masculine role based on what I think the situation needs. And I don't always get it right either. Like I don't have it perfectly nailed down, but I think being open to the idea that my feminine is just as powerful in those arenas as my masculine is what has been empowering. Because now it's not like, oh, let me hide this and be a man so that I can get what I need to get done. It's more like actually both of these are really, really powerful, and which one needs to be in the driver's seat at this moment.
Definitely. I completely agree. And what's interesting is I have the opposite experience. I came from a very feminine, like to
Mhm.
like very sensitive place. And honestly, now in my late 30s, going into jujitsu has really helped me to embrace my masculine. So right now, I'm trying to figure out how to balance that in both my lives. You think though jujitsu is a masculine sport specifically, but it's really not, because it requires like you to be in touch with your body and be in your body, and to experience an intuitive dance and exchange of energy between you and your partner. And I know we were talking before about how much of a gift it can be able to be in a space like that and be so intimate with men, that it could be a very healing and just a very rewarding experience to be so vulnerable. So maybe tell us a little bit about the vulnerability you were speaking of being in a sport like this.
Yeah, it is really interesting the level of vulnerability because for those women out there that may want to try jiu-jitsu in the future, it's important to know that when you go in, most places they do have women's classes. You don't necessarily have to go with men in the beginning. I mean, you never have to train with anybody that you don't want to train with. You can always say no, thank you. But once you get to the level where you do feel more comfortable and you want to roll with men or train with men from or even just women who are more experienced than you, just
Mhm.
human beings in general, like you're going with someone who's more experienced, who's stronger, who's bigger, who's faster, whatever it is. With this scenario, it's important to understand that like this is a very vulnerable position where you are putting a lot of trust in another person to take care of your safety because in theory, they know how to tap you out, how to break your arm, how to choke you. Now, are they going to do these things and hurt you if you're in a good train like, no, it's hard because I don't wanna say that never happens, but you just need to know that you're in a place that's safe and you're in a good training environment. But if that's the case, and it is, 99.99% of the time, you are exchanging a level of vulnerability where somebody else has a lot of power, right? And so it's a power exchange where you are trading that vulnerability for gaining knowledge, gaining experience, gaining power. Because the more you do it, then you start to become the person on the other end of the role that has more experience, that has more power. So it's both humbling and humanizing and empowering at the same time because you feel a level of vulnerability and you feel a level of strength as you continue to grow. So it's really, really fascinating in that way to me. And I think going back to the masculine versus feminine, like even in jujitsu, There are times and places in jujitsu where I would say I'm more reactive. I'm more, you could use the word emotional, but I don't mean that with a negative connotation. I mean, like, I let my emotions drive me. There are times like that on the mat. And then there are also times on the mat where I'm more stoic. I'm a lot more patient. I'm more disciplined with my energy, my reactions, my response time. And learning to have the dance between the two is a really beautiful thing. And I see that reflected in my life off the mats as well. So it's a great place to practice it. That shows up in my business, that shows up in the way I take care of myself, that shows up in my relationships. In my relationships, how often am I employing that gut level truth and honesty and just responding with emotion and from my heart versus the times where I'm a little bit more structured, more disciplined with the way that I'm interacting or responding to somebody. So it's the same physically as it is emotionally speaking or verbally. And so with jujitsu, it's like doing that in a way where, like, there's nothing more bonding in my experience than shared struggle. So when you're on the mats with somebody and we're getting tired, we're getting exhausted, we're exerting ourselves, we're all getting tapped out. I mean, it's very humbling. Like, nobody graduates from jujitsu. Like, we are all getting tapped out. There's always more to learn. When you're in that environment with people, the bonds that are created with them, but also I think the relationship that you create with yourself is such a closer one because you're allowing yourself to be seen in a vulnerable state and you're allowing yourself to be uplifted and you're allowing, for yourself to have a bit of a deconstruction of your own ego and who you think you
Mhm.
are, and when you do that, the beautiful thing about deconstruction is that it allows room for new. So when you allow the ability to be deconstructed a little bit, you get to rebuild and you get to renew and you get to decide who you want to be in a way that maybe you didn't have space for before you allowed something to be deconstructed.
Couldn't agree more. And I think when I talk to people that don't do jujitsu, I always say it has gifted me so much that I didn't even realize or expect going into it. And one of those things is just more confidence in myself, learning my own limitations in a way that I hadn't before. And then also knowing what it feels like to be very uncomfortable in uncomfortable situations, and yeah, just put yourself, your health, your physical body in the care of someone else, and just trusting that it's going to be okay. And especially when you tap or the bell rings and things are over, you guys are friends, and it's just a very unique dynamic and relationship that you have with people who practice. So I love that. And because you do so many things, and I love the mindset aspect, I think a lot of people get stuck because they can't shift their perception of something
Mhm.
or the way that they're framing something, or maybe they don't even realize the story that they're telling themselves. I wanted to go into the mindset aspect of what you do, not only just for competing in sports, but
Mhm.
also for life and all the different things you do. I think it's so amazing. I love that you're also an announcer. So talk about mindset in regard to everything.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, man, there's so much to go into. I would say that allowing myself to be a multifaceted person was a pretty big piece of growth in itself because going back into like masculine versus feminine, like I learned through wrestling and through jujitsu that if I was very tunnel visioned and very intense and very disciplined and very structured, that I would win. And to me, winning became the pinnacle of what was important in life. Everything needed to revolve around winning. And if I was winning, then I was okay. And if I was winning, I felt important, I felt special, and oftentimes felt better than. Like, I felt like I was the best. And it's so funny because I talked to my therapist about that. And there's this, well, you probably already know because you train jiu-jitsu, but there's this jiu-jitsu show for people who don't know called Who's Number One. And we laugh and I work on the media side of it and I've fought on it as well as an athlete. And we laugh and we call it the who's number one complex because I have this complex that, like, if I am not the best, then none of it matters. And so I learned, having compassion for my younger self who learned this. It's almost like, it's like no wonder I developed that because it was very real. Like, I was given more attention, I was given more money, I was given more opportunity, I was given more friends, I was getting more attention from men. Like, if I was the winner in the room. So all that to be said, what I have learned, especially I would say in the last 5-ish years, is that exploring other areas, being willing to not be great at something, to start over as a white belt, you could say, to be willing to be seen messily, to be willing to be seen not great at something yet. That is super empowering because the mindset piece of this is I didn't want to be seen in vulnerability. I could do it in the mats in the gym, but I really didn't want to be seen unless I was the winner. So by doing new things, and that's, owning businesses, that's being in media, being on camera, doing announcing, doing interviewing, commentating, traveling and doing seminars in the very beginning, online coaching, when in jujitsu, nobody does that. It's very common in fitness and in other areas, life coaching, stuff like that. But in my arena, I'm sure there are other people out there that do stuff like this, but I don't know them. I never had anybody to watch and to copy. So there was a lot of potential perception, like negative perception of what I was doing because it's not something we do in our industry. It's new for us. So, with all that being said, I think stepping into that was really empowering because I took my power back. I was like, if I can be seen messy and be seen as not the winner, then I'm reconditioning myself to feel that that is acceptable. I'm reconditioning myself to not feel like I need to be the shiniest person in the room to be able to breathe, which is how I used to be. And so it's not to say like, oh, I've totally graduated from that, or I mean, there's a reason my therapist and I refer to it as my who's number one complex. And I'm very public and I talk about it really publicly because it's just a part of who I am. And I know I'm not alone in that. But I will say, like, it's almost like exposure therapy, like exposing myself to failure or to trying stuff that's new or to not being the best publicly has been a huge unlock for my mindset because it has taken the fear away. And it's like I love the word like threshold or bandwidth because I believe that when we go past what we feel our threshold or our bandwidth is for discomfort, whether that's in training, whether that's in showing up online, whether that's in trying something new, doing something at work, being vulnerable in a relationship, when we go past what we feel is comfortable, our current threshold or our current bandwidth, every single time we do that, the threshold and the bandwidth now grows and it gets bigger. So for me, it was like exposure therapy of being like, this mindset is keeping me really trapped and it's keeping me really small because I only have this tunnel vision for this one thing. And it's not that I didn't have to ever have to deal with failure, but it was in the realm of what I was already comfortable with because it, in a way, trained me to be okay with failure because like my initial exposure therapy to failure in a lot of ways was through martial arts. It was through wrestling and it was through jiu-jitsu because nobody gets out alive. Everybody's going to get tapped out. Everyone's going to lose matches. So then that gave me the ability and the strength to then go outside of my box and try new stuff. And then as I was doing that, now I'm not great, but I'm fairly good at trying new stuff and having failure. So when you are now exposed, or when I am now exposed or have to a lot of failure or have a high threshold for not just pain and discomfort in training, but pain and discomfort in perception, then there's a huge unlock that happens because now it's like you're free. Like I'm free. Like I can do whatever I want because it's not about other people's perception of me. It's about my perception of me. And if I no longer equate failure in an activity with failure as a person, well, now I'm free to do whatever I want. And the more I strive and the more like I believe that a lot of the time success is really related to overcoming. So the more failure you can take and the faster you can bounce back every single time you have a piece of failure, the faster, and then learn and recalibrate, the faster you're going to have success. But that requires a level of comfort with failure that you cannot escape from. So I think that's been a really big piece of my mindset is getting comfortable with failure, recalibrating, deciding whose opinion about me is important to me. And that comes down to like myself and the people that I really love and respect that are close to me and know me really well. Those are the opinions that I'm valuing. And if I'm doing that, then I'm unstoppable. I can do anything I put my mind to because as long as I never quit, I continue to get closer and closer and closer. And I develop confidence through esteemable action right? And so every time I fail and then do something better the next time, my confidence grows because I'm feeding my self-esteem.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much there that you just said, but I think it's a tricky one because essentially what you do when you're so narrowly focused and you're just focused on winning is that you're living, breathing for the external validation because there's going to come a point where you're not going to win. And if that's where you get your life source from or your self-worth and your self-esteem from, then once that stops or people don't pay attention to you because you didn't win, then who are you? And you lose your sense of self, and it's a very ego heavy and driven way to live, which, like you said, if you're competing and you have a certain goal, I mean, there is a necessary level
Yeah.
of that you need, and focus and determination, and being
Oh,
narrow.
yeah. Well, it's like a persona, right? Because okay, so this is really interesting because I wanna go back to, okay, I sound all, like, experienced and evolved and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so it's like that part of me that I just went into and talked about for like whatever 6 or 7 minutes, like that runs the show a lot of the time. However, right? We talk about the balance, we talk about the dance between the two, the relationship between the two. When I'm going into training or when I'm going into competition, like there is an alter ego that needs to be stepped into. And that alter ego, she is like, kind of like my stage name, athlete name, like Queen K. Like I don't walk around as that all the time, but when I go to a tournament, like nobody can fuck with me. Like nobody. Like in that arena, that is who I become. It comes back to getting to know these parts of ourselves. Like if you think about like parts work in classic therapy, obviously I'm not a therapist, just put that out there. But I've done a lot of work in this arena and
But your
I feel comfortable.
but your mom is a PhD in
She in Jungian psychology. Yeah, she's amazing. She wrote her dissertation on the effects of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu on the human psyche, and it's very, very fascinating. And I have a lot of experience with personal work. But what I'll say about parts work is that all these parts of me, whether it's like my pissed off teenage self that's like, fuck you, fuck this, fuck that. I don't need anybody, right? Or the little child that's like, oh, please don't leave me. Or the who's number one syndrome, right? Or I mean, go on and on and on and on and on. There's so many different parts. So Queen K, you can name her that. Like I like to put names to these parts of ourselves. She is a part of me, but I have to look at any arena that I'm in and decide like who is driving the car. So they're all okay. There's nothing like I don't want to label our parts as bad or good or better than. They're all okay. They just exist.
like knowing them and knowing when, accepting them, and
Mhm.
then knowing when they're necessary to come and be at the forefront.
Exactly. Exactly. So knowing when they need to be driving the car and picking who is driving the car and doing so intentionally. So when I walk into a tournament, Queen K is driving the car because she has the best, that's where she shines. And that's going to give me the best opportunity to shine in that arena and to succeed in that arena. And that's why I step into the arena to really to strengthen and to train her, right? So same thing like when I go get a massage, that is an act of self-love. That is an act of taking care of myself. The person in the driver's seat, you could say, I mean, it's interesting, like we're doing this as we speak, but you could, as an experiment, you could say that that is little Kendall, right? Who's like, oh, like I need love. I want to be massaged and touched and I want to be taken care of and, held. And like, or you could say, it's just an experiment. You could say, like, that's my divine feminine,
Yeah.
right? My divine feminine self, my purest feminine self. That's like, I love to give love to myself. I love to be doted on. I love to be cherished. Like that could be in the driver's seat in that moment. Just depends on where I'm at mentally or why I'm going to that thing. So I think analyzing why am I doing what I'm doing? Who is running the show right now? Who's in the driver's seat is the key for me to a lot of mindset unlocks because what it also does is it means that I don't have to make any part of me wrong or bad. And when I look back to at younger or different pieces of my life when maybe I acted out in a way that I'm not proud of now or that I wouldn't want to repeat in the future, I can also look at that girl and say, who was driving the car? And then when I look at who was driving the car, I can develop compassion because I can say, oh, baby girl, like I understand why that happened. I understand why you did what you did. that piece of you, I love her, I cherish her, but she's going to go sit in the back seat. She doesn't need to keep running the show. She doesn't need to keep driving the car. We can acknowledge her, love her for who she is, but she's going to go hang out in the back seat, and she's well taken care of, but she's not the decision maker anymore because now I know better. Now I have a better way of taking care of myself and acknowledge and taking care of her, that hurt girl that did whatever she did that was, not something I would want to repeat. And we've all got lots of parts of ourselves. And so once we start really, and I'm a huge believer obviously in therapy because I think a lot of this has been unraveled for me through the help of through outside help rather than just me in my own head and my own family members, although my family members are extremely helpful in identifying this stuff too. Sometimes it helps to have someone that is completely objective, right?
Mhm.
So with that being said, I can't separate my mindset work from personal development stuff. I mean, if you want to call it personal development or therapist like therapy, because I think it's like sport. A lot of people think about mindset work, especially in the arena of business or athletics, as performance. How do I get to high performance? And it's like, yes, there is an aspect of high performance training in the mindset world. But for me, that is not properly utilized to the best of its ability if I'm not also doing this personal development stuff, because me knowing myself the way that I do and developing, like, almost I would say like my own self emotional intelligence, like my EQ with me is now so strong that when I go into my high performing mindset, success, focus stuff, it's way more effective and I can use it well instead of trying to band-aid over everything that's going on with me all the time.
Yeah, and if you think of yourself, it's almost like you can't abandon pieces of yourself and leave parts of yourself behind. If you think of yourself as a whole and you have chunks like Swiss cheese, I say, missing from you, and you try to show up and be the best at something, it's like, well, you left, a third of yourself back there and are trying to ignore it. So if the more you can gather all the parts and show up together in harmony, or have them,
Right.
know their roles within you, it's easier to focus, right?
It's so true, and honestly, like, a great example of this would be the last Nogi World Championships that I did in December, right? So, I won the World Championships in December, and going into this tournament, it was probably the easiest tournament experience that I've ever had, and that's saying a lot because 'cause I've been out of competition for quite a while due to an injury, but going into that competition, this was, let's see, what's April. So it was only a couple months ago. I won this world championships in December. Going into that tournament, I felt the most connected and aligned as far as why am I doing what I'm doing? Who shows up to win this match? How much do I need this? And how much fun can I have? Where am I fighting from? And I was really like fighting from my place of my heart, right? So embodying, like, not being the Swiss cheese that day, being like a slice of solid cheddar. Cheddar is my favorite cheese. So like being a slice of solid cheddar cheese, going in there, and I'm really embodying my fullest range of myself, and all of my parts get a seat at the table. When I fought like that, I mean, honestly, it was like the easiest, most successful, most dominant performance I've had at a major competition at black belt. And looking back on that, I didn't realize it at the time, but it's pretty astonishing that that didn't really feel challenging to me, because I am not the girl who has been so unchallengeably dominant for years and years and years. There's people out there that exist like that. And if they were to say that they won something easily, you'd be like, oh yeah, I understand. I've been successful, but it's not like I've been so dominant that nobody can touch me. Right. That's not been my experience on the mats. I've had a lot of challenges and I've won a lot and I've lost a lot. So for me to go in and have that experience, in my opinion, says less about my jujitsu and more about my personal work, because the energy that I got to show up with, the level of love that I had while I was on the mats, my internal state affected and changed and controlled in a lot of ways the physical response to what happened or the physical experience that I had. So that would be like the largest change between that world championships and tournaments before. And so when you're talking about high level performance, we can't leave personal development out of it, in my experience. And not to say that like you can't, because I think I probably went into, well, I know I did, went into high level performance first and then was kind of shown the path through different personal development stuff and parts work and shadow work and things like this. And I think a lot of times the reason we see high level athletes or entrepreneurs, business owners get into personal development is probably not dissimilar to what happened with me, where I was looking for high level performance and then I was led to more personal development. So I think that that is definitely a route, but it's just that I now could almost never separate the 2. They're completely intertwined, and that showed up for me in December in a really powerful way.
Yeah, because it's all your mind, and you can't, like, again, it's all one. So you can't ignore certain parts without it catching up to you at a certain point. And then winning in that energy and that state of being of a more healed version of yourself, if you want to say, it's amazing that you won. But regardless if you did, if you know that you showed up in a way where it felt healthy to you, and then winning on top of it, it's almost like, regardless of what anyone else thinks, you know that the work that you put in, and that those kind of experiences are, in my opinion, things that are confidence and character building, because you know the work that you did to get there, and nobody can take that away from you. It's a very much about you, less about what anyone else is thinking or perceiving about your performance. And I think that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you need it less, it is more about the journey, and people say that all the time, like, "Oh, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey," and I used to think those people were so crazy because I was like, "Oh, maybe for you, but for me, because I really wanna win and I'm really a champion, like, maybe that makes sense for you. For me, it is about the goal," and I used to be really high on that, like, "Oh, because I want it more, because I care more, because I need that, because I have more drive. That's what makes me a champion and you not. Like you're a loser, I'm champion." Like if you think about the journey and not about the destination, like that's what sets us apart. Like I really, and it shows like how masculine I was. Like I needed to believe that to get to where I was. And I don't have anything but love for that young girl who had that experience and those thoughts because it led me to where I am, and it pain, like, it led me to enough pain because when you feel that way and then you don't get the thing, or you lose, or you don't get the job, or you lose the relationship, or whatever, when you need it and you don't get it, for me, it brought me enough pain that I was willing to try something different because I couldn't keep doing what I was doing. It was too excruciatingly painful. So now I have a totally different experience with it where it's not that that feeling doesn't ever come up. That girl's still a part of me. She still sometimes tries to run the show. But when I can remind myself that, like, actually, I really don't need this thing to feel good about myself. I really don't need this thing to survive. So then it breaks down to like, what am I doing on a daily basis? What am I doing every single day? Do I really like my life? Do I like what I'm doing every single day? Like when I start asking those questions and then the answer is yes, then there's freedom because I just gave myself permission to enjoy it. I
Yeah.
just gave myself permission to love it, to enjoy it, to have fun. And then when I go out and perform, no one can take away everything that got me there, just like you said. Like all those days of enjoyment and love are still mine to keep forever, no matter what. And when I have the freedom of knowing that, then I can perform freely. And when I perform freely, I do a much better job because I get to be in that flow state. Then if I don't get the thing anyway, I think about ADCC, how I had that big injury in 2022. That was the exact experience that I had where it was like, I didn't get the thing. I got injured. I got taken out on a stretcher, went to the hospital. It was absolutely horrendous and horrible. But what I remember the most about ADCC is not that. It's about the prep. It's about the first day. It's about all the experiences of enjoyment that I had because I felt free to actually sink into the moment, to be present, to love them, and to know that because I wasn't distracted only thinking about winning, I actually appreciated everything that was happening in the moment. Those memories stick with me inside my heart forever in a way that they wouldn't have if I was so distracted by the goal that I wasn't present. Because I look back on most of my tournament preps and I don't really remember them. I remember the tournament day, but I don't really remember the things leading up to them. And I don't, and that's different for me now. Now
Yeah.
I'm more in the present moment. And it's like, that is something that no one can ever take away from me.
Yeah, and it's building your house, like I would say, like on a solid foundation versus building your house on an unstable foundation because like it will crumble at any point because it's empty, like inside. There's nothing really solid holding your self-worth up if you if you want, or who you are, your identity is just rooted in something so unstable that it's gonna crumble at the littlest shake or littlest earthquake. I know we're gonna wrap up soon, but before we do, I wanted to just talk a little bit about being so multifaceted and so multi-passionate because I think, at least for me, and maybe it's changing now for your time when you were growing up, but you actually mentioned it before about how people don't do everything that they want to do. You kind of pick your niche and you stay there, and we're kind of taught that you can't be many different things. You know, you're only the one thing that you choose to focus on, the one career path. And if you do other things, you're flaky and you're weird. And I think that everything that you do is a perfect example of someone who is succeeding and excelling, being able to do many different things at the same time and be multi passionate. So, can you just kind of go into how you got to where you are or what led you down the path to be able to have so many different layers that are now like compounded to grow into many different things?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, with me, I don't think I could have survived any other way. Like, I think it's just part of who I am. I'm curious. I think allowing myself to be curious, not getting too attached to, I mean, part of it was like getting injuries in jujitsu, which isn't everybody's story, but it happened to be mine, was a really big piece of things because I started to have to develop my identity outside of being an athlete because I wasn't getting the validation anymore. I wasn't getting the attention anymore. I didn't wake up in the morning anymore and have a mission that I was on. Like, this is my mission because I was in pause mode. My mission was just to get healthy again. So then it really was easy to start to look outward of like my normal day-to-day life and say, okay, well, what else can I try? But honestly, so I think like for a lot of reasons it was survival. But now because I have the practice of it, because I have the habit of it, it's less survival and it's more of a choice. Now I'm like, I ask myself questions all the time. Like, do I like what I'm doing? Like when I started to compete again, I ask myself all the time, and I still do, like, do I want to do this? Why? Why am I doing this? Why is this something that I really want to like buckle? Is it for validation? Is it because it's what's familiar? Is it because I have certainty in this area because I know I can succeed, like a certain level of stability? My relationships, like all the people around me kind of know, like I get to keep that connection with them. So I think that we all deserve the opportunity to taste test a lot of life. And we don't necessarily give ourselves that opportunity because we get locked into one thing that works. Now, it is true that if you want to be excellent at something, it takes a lot of time and energy and dedication, but there are seasons. Like there are seasons to things. As an athlete, like there is a window of time that you have to be at the top of the top of the top, especially for women, because we're thinking about, having children. And a lot of times people come back from having children and do really, really great athletically. And I think that that's incredible that people can do that. I don't see that as my journey or my calling. Like I don't feel that that would feel right for me. So in my case, I'm 26. I'm like, okay, I'll have this window before I start having children, maybe in my early 30s, because that's kind of where, I mean, who knows? I love the phrase, like, you make plans and God laughs. Cause I mean, I'm just like, no idea, but that's in my mind what I'm thinking of. And so there's one thing that there's like time constraints on as far as windows of opportunity. But even without that, like if you think about, okay, so say the athlete parts, maybe that athlete part ends, and let's just throw it out there. I had two kids and I'm 32, like just to put that into one tangible way to look at this. So then it's like, okay, well, you have this window of having children. And we all know, or at least my mom always laughs at this, is like, having kids doesn't end when they're 18. Like you're a parent forever. It's the only thing that's permanent. So you have kids, say I'm 32, and now you're a wife and you're like, well, this no longer is a season of like 5 or 6 years. This is now like a forever thing. So now this is my box. This is the thing that I'm good at. Like, why do we stop ourselves from also stepping into other areas that feel exciting or powerful or energetic? So going back to the idea of taste testing, I don't think that it's like the expectation, you kind of see like the feminism pendulum swing from feeling oppressed to now I can do everything and I can do it all myself. I can be a mom, I can work full time, I can do it in high heels, and I can do it better than you, right? And I have a lot of women in my life who laugh at that and they're like, wait a second, like I don't actually want to do everything all the time. Like I understand why the pendulum swung this far, but this is unfair. Like this is
Yeah.
fucked up. Like
Yeah, and
so
that's
yeah.
the, like, distorted masculine energy that we're told that we have to be the man and be like, talking about the balance coming back. I think it's swinging more towards the
I
middle
think
now, but
I think so too. And so anyway, I just wanted to put that out there because I'm not advocating for like you need to be everything, you need to do everything, you need to have it all together and have it all figured out and have multiple passions. But it's more like the permission slip to like nobody has to live with you for the rest of your life the way that you do. So if you have something that feels exciting to you, fucking go for it. Who cares if you fail at it or if somebody else doesn't like it or if somebody thinks it's silly or it's just like you are the only one you have to answer to really at the end of the day. And then obviously if you know, have, a partner that you're making, mutual decisions with, or you're religious and you have this, or spiritual and have this relationship with God, you feel that's like a different conversation. But at the end of the day, like the way you relate to yourself is the only real thing, in my opinion, that we can control. Like I can really only control my relationship with myself. So if that's true, then it's a disservice to box myself in to one specific thing rather than taste testing so much that life has to offer because life has so much to offer. There's so many, like I think trying classes, traveling to new places, making friends with people that you normally wouldn't identify with, talking to people at the grocery store. Like there are so many ways to get outside of our normal box. It doesn't have to be, oh, go start a new career or, oh, go start a podcast. It doesn't have to be some giant shift in your life, but little things, even like the way you like the power of the plasticity of the brain, like the way that you put on your shoes, like one sock and then the shoe, one sock and then the shoe versus like one sock, shoe, shoe. Like changing your patterns and the way that you organize things, like habits are great, but changing your patterns and driving a different way to work or, taking a new class. Like for me, like doing Pilates classes is so fun because I know how to work out. I know it's probably not something I'll do when I'm in a training camp because everything's very dialed in, but it's like allowing freedom and creativity to try different things is really, really beautiful. And I think it's one of the best ways to experience like your fullest expression and to learn more about yourself because you don't really know what you love until you are taste testing these things. And then you get to meet new parts of yourself. And it's like a never ending discovery process. And it's really beautiful.
it's interesting. I think you and I are very similar in that way because I have friends that tell me, "Oh, you're so brave and you're always trying these new things." Like I live in London right now, like did jujitsu at 37,
Hmm.
36. So I think again, the going into just because you're trying something doesn't mean you have to be the best at it and doesn't
Or commit
mean you
to it.
can make it.
You don't
Yeah,
have to keep doing it. Like,
try it and you'll never know what you want to do. And my friend's like, "Well, I don't know. I feel so stuck." And I'm like, go try anything. Go. If you've
yes,
thought about trying a cooking class, like anything, get out with the
just,
people and it'll just lead you to the next thing if you don't
yeah.
like that. Find something
And you
else.
can always change your mind. Like that's really important to remember. You don't have to know your life's purpose and passion in any given moment. Like you can change your mind as often as you need to. I believe that as long as we are committed to certain principles and values, that is what makes me not flaky or shaky of a person. Like I am solid in who I am. And then the way that I express who I am is consistent in that it's always me. And I always am upholding the person that I want to be. And then that person gets to try a lot of stuff.
I love that. I couldn't agree more. That's such great advice. Kendall, is there anything else you want to touch on before we say goodbye?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the main thing I do talk a lot about for people who may relate to this, I do talk a lot about my eating disorder
Oh yeah.
recovery and body image, like especially being in a weight class sport and being in an arena where there is such a focus on body or body size equals value. But I talk a lot about that on my social media. So people can find me on Instagram. It's at Kendall Reusing. My last name is spelled like reusing. So it's really easy to find. And you guys can check different captions and stuff there. But the main thing that I will just leave you guys with in that arena is that there is a solution. There is recovery possible if it's something that you struggle with and you feel like you think about all day long or every day, or it comes up, or you can't find clothes. You never put on an outfit that feels good, or you're constantly comparing yourself to other people. Like there is freedom from that exists out there. And if we're searching for it, it will find you if you're searching for it. Like there's different programs, different stuff, but like don't be afraid to look for those answers or to feel like you're alone because there are answers and there are solutions and you're not alone. And I have more about that on my social media too, so people can find.
I was going to say, I also talked about that, how it feels. I've struggled with my weight in the past too, and how it feels to not feel at home in your own body, and just such a tricky place to be. So before I let you go, how did you find, I call it like acceptance with your body? Because once you get to a place where you accept, you're able to move forward, in my opinion, in my experience. So how did you come out of that?
Yeah, honestly, I mean, that is like a whole podcast in itself
Okay.
because there's so much to go into,
Yeah.
but I would say that for me, like it had a lot to do with the work underneath. Why was I eating what I was eating? Why was I equating my worth with my body size? Why was I emotionally regulating with eating disorder behaviors? Like that is really what it came down to. So I have like a program of recovery that I'm in that I work on this stuff with that addresses what's going on underneath, and then it becomes about the way that I'm living my life. So now I would say there's a lot of stuff you can find on the internet. There's people you can ask about it too. Like if you're Googling, eating disorder recovery and stuff, like there's a lot of different programs you can get yourself into. But the acceptance piece is that I no longer, I would say most of the time, not perfectly, like I believe eating disorders are disorders of self-loathing and self-hate. And so for me, a lot of an isolation and a lot of the recovery then had to be around connection with people who had recovery too. Getting out of that isolation, telling my truth, like talking completely in truth about what was going on, and then of self love and compassion and understanding for myself and getting out of like hating myself for these behaviors and who I was becoming. So that was the beginning of a lifelong journey that I don't ever see myself leaving. But again, we could and there's we should if we get on together again, there's so much to talk about there. But the main thing is that there is a solution. You're not alone if you're feeling any of this. And you're more than your body. Like you are more than your body, you're more than your eating habits, you're more than your level of attractiveness or the size of your clothes. Like there is so much life out there. I feel like life gets really big when my eating disorder got small. And when my eating disorder is small, or big, sorry, I stay small because there's not enough room in my heart and my mind for both. So when my eating disorder got small, my life got bigger. And I think that encouragement around that, like feeling when I do esteem, like when I feel that and it grows my self esteem because I'm creating a life that I really love, it creates a positive reinforcement to keep going in that direction and to value myself for who I am over what my body size is. And I don't do this perfectly 100% of the time, but the more I do it, it's like anything. The more I strengthen that muscle, the stronger it gets. So I have to practice being in that state. But when I am in that state, it gets stronger. And then I struggle less over time.
Kendall, thank you so much for sharing. I had such a nice time talking to you. Thank you for being on the podcast. You mentioned your Instagram. So, anywhere else aside from, can you give your
Yeah.
podcast?
Yeah, so that's the best place to find me on IG, but I also have a YouTube channel that I do a lot of vlogs, and I put my podcasts on there as well. So my podcast is called Get a Grip with you can put Get a Grip with Kendall Reusing and it'll come up. My Instagram is Kendall Reusing. That's where everything is. My link tree there has like everything that you would ever need. But my YouTube is also Kendall Reusing BJJ. So you could just search my name on there and my channel will come up. I do my podcast there on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, but I also have vlogs of like day-to-day life and different things, which is really cool. And you can see a little bit more about training, but also about like I have been doing some different modeling projects and different stuff that's on there. And I do talk about like purpose and passion and finding your path and a lot of different things on the YouTube channel. There's also like behind the scenes of day-to-day life with like my partner and my training and my businesses. And so there's a lot there too.
Awesome. I feel like we could stay on here and talk for hours, but thank you so much, Kendall.
Awesome. Thank you so much.